Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Gladden Longevity Podcast, where we're basically focused on helping you to live young for a lifetime. And we're doing that by answering 4 empowering questions. How good can you be? How do you make 100 the new 30? How do you live well beyond 120? And how do you actually live young for a lifetime? And on today's podcast, we're going to be talking with Victor Sagalovsky. He's involved with Deuterium-depleted water, which always seems like an esoteric topic to me, but he's done a lot of work in this area and is bringing some very highly depleted deuterium water to the market. It's a really interesting podcast talking about deuterium-depleted water, the health benefits, the longevity benefits, and kind of getting down to the central reason how it works. And if deuterium isn't depleted, how it works against us. So I think you're going to learn a lot on this podcast. That's a great one. Thanks. Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Gladden Longevity Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, and Steve Ryder's off playing hooky again today. I'm not sure where he's at, but wish him well. I'm here today with a special guest, actually, Victor Sagalovsky. Hopefully I got that right, Victor, or close to it.
Close enough. Close enough.
Victor is working in a really interesting area of deuterium-depleted water, which maybe some of you have heard about. There are many health benefits associated with it, and we want to dive into this for you. He actually has a website where we're able to get a hold of deuterium-depleted water, supposedly, and we'll discover this in the conversation, some of the lowest deuterium content water that you can ever find, maybe ever find. Yeah, but that being said, so Victor, tell us a little bit about your own journey. How did you get to water? You've got a little bit of an interesting background. You're a polymath. You've been involved in a lot of different things, but what led you to this?
Yeah, well, shortly after becoming really interested and involved in food as medicine movement, in the early 90s, it naturally took me to water.
You were a vegan chef, right? You started a restaurant.
I did. At 23, I started a restaurant called Raw with a partner of mine, and that was a gourmet vegan restaurant. It was a new concept, very new concept at the time. We got a lot of great press in local newspapers, and actually I think it helped launch a giant movement. But I got involved, as soon as I was involved in knowing you are what you eat, I certainly the question comes up as well, what is the best water to drink? So studied everything I could, Victor Schauberger primarily, talking about the benefits of spring water versus tap water, all the experiments. So I got really intrigued by spring water. Even in high school, one of my friends said, "Here, try this. It's a brand called Canadian Music from Canada. Here, try this." And I'm like, wow, why does this water taste different than water I get at home? It looks the same, it feels the same, but it tastes different. So that, in my teenage years, that started my lifelong fascination with the mysteries of water. And then everywhere I traveled, I would bring all my meters, ORME, pH, TDS, other things, conductivity, and I would hike the springs, and I was obsessed with in understanding the nuanced differences of water and what creates those differences. And ultimately, as I got better versed in biochemistry and more of the science down at the mitochondrial and cellular energy production level, I started to understand more about metabolic water. And then 2004, I learned about deuterium-depleted water, or light water. So it's kind of been an evolution with the first question being, what is the right water for the body? Well, the right water for the body, first and foremost, is the water that our bodies make. We come to find out that's called metabolic water. So, and that water is deuterium-depleted. So, sure enough,
it is that. I think we get it from burning fat.
Yes, we get it. Yes, it's from burning fat, and it's somewhere between 40 and 60 ppm.
Okay, so ppm for the audience is parts per million. So when we're talking about deuterium, let's define deuterium first off. I don't think probably everybody listening knows what that is. Talking about hydrogen here.
Yeah, so in 1931, it was discovered that hydrogen had another isotope, meaning that a version of itself, still the element, but when you have a difference in the number of neutrons, that creates isotopes. So in hydrogen's particular case, it being the smallest element in the universe and the first element on the periodic table, it doesn't have a neutron. It's the only element without a neutron. It's a simple proton and electron. However, deuteron or deuterium is that proton electron with an added neutron. So that makes it twice the size, twice the mass essentially of the parent atom, which is hydrogen. So 0.012% of all hydrogen is deuterium. So it's a very small amount, but nonetheless, it was discovered that it exists. And that started off, if it hadn't been discovered, we wouldn't have had an atomic age. We wouldn't have had nuclear bombs or nuclear reactors, nuclear power plants. So we wouldn't have understood atomic energy in the way we do now had we not made that breakthrough in understanding the elements and their isotopes, and in this case, hydrogen. So deuterium also binds with oxygen to create water. Only when it binds with oxygen, it's in a configuration not as H2O as we think. We look at water as H2O, but in that configuration, it either becomes HOD or HDO, that D being deuterium, or D2O, which is pure deuterium oxide, which is pure heavy water, which
that's pretty rare, isn't it?
It doesn't really occur in nature, except 1 out of every 41 million molecules of water. But it is something that we make synthetically, and we make a lot of it for as a neutron moderator for old-style nuclear reactors. And other things. It's used in medicine, but that's pure heavy water. And pure heavy water, shortly after it was discovered that water can take this heavy form, they did all kinds of experiments to see how different it was from regular water. And sure enough, if you give somebody 35% heavy water, not even pure, 35% heavy water for a few days, a mammal, just about any life form that breathes oxygen, but in this case, it was a mammal, they die on somewhere between day 3 and day 4. So
what are we talking about? We're talking about like mice or something like that?
Mice, dogs, yeah. I mean, they've done it with humans, I'm sure, but not officially.
Right.
But yeah, you can kill somebody by just giving them pure heavy water or diluted heavy water. So that's when they discovered it's incompatible with human biology. And then it took another number of years, probably 50 plus years before it was discovered how. It was a lot of theories, but then in 2007, Dr. Olgun in Turkey wrote a phenomenal paper explaining how deuterium actually damaged the electron transport chain and the ATP synthase nanomotor in our mitochondria, and how this was we have a purely mechanical problem. And this mechanical problem is that our energy is made by the rapid flow of protons and electrons. Well, when one of those protons is carrying a neutron, then problems ensue because it's not compatible.
So it's interesting, just so the audience understands. So you may be wondering, why is deuterium around at all? It's just, in chemistry, a form of a substance, if you will, kind of lives in equilibrium with different isotopes. It could be 1, it could be 2, it could be whatever. But it's present just as a act of creation, if you will. What's interesting, too, is that the concentrations of this heavy water are different on different parts of the planet and in different bodies of water, which has been another piece of this puzzle. Do you want to walk us through that a little bit, Victor, in terms of how the concentration is heavier around the equator, maybe in the ocean, things like that, and how people are living longer in places that are sort of naturally lower in deuterium?
Sure. This is what spurred the original research in Siberia. Was a young gerontologist and a young biophysicist were trying to make a name for themselves, and their senior professors told them, well, if you want to make a name for yourself, figure out why these people, essentially Yakutians and Altaians, essentially like Eskimos, very similar, right? Aboriginal people. Why do they have so many healthy people? Why do they have so many centenarians, like something like 7 or 8 times more centenarians than everywhere else in the Soviet republics or Europe, for that matter? So they went about in the late 50s trying to figure that out. And, they analyzed diet, analyzed lifestyle, all kinds of things. But then when they started looking at water, And let's put it in context. This was in the mid to late 50s. It was only 15 years before that it was discovered that there were these heavier isotopes that they didn't know about before. Mm-hmm. So anyway, they measured that, and they found that these populations were drinking water that was their melt water, their snow melt water that was 16% lower than the ocean, which is always 155.76, and lower than most tap water anywhere else. So
they'd be down around 125, is what you're saying, close to that.
Well, they were in the low 130s there. It does. Right. There are natural places where it gets all the way into 120. Now in North America, you'll find anywhere from 150, which is anywhere that's coastal, or coastal, Florida, large cities, around 150 parts per million, because it's influenced by the hydrological cycle of the ocean, so it's naturally going to be higher. And then you'll find some places in the United States around the Rocky Mountains, northern latitudes, where it will be as low as 135, 136, and anywhere in between. And then you get into Alaska, and then in certain places you find it in the 120s. Same thing in certain places in Canada, upper 120s, and you go to the Himalayas, you find mid 120s, and then North Pole is like 105, 106. And then Antarctica is 89, which is phenomenal anomaly.
Why is it so much lower? Does it have to do with sort of the massive glaciers down there, or is there, what is it?
No, what it has to do with is that's the water that was locked in time fairly quickly. Like Antarctica turned to ice fairly quickly in a geologic time scale, and so that water that was there, that's about water from 89, from 40 to 80 million years ago, maybe up to 100. But anyway, that's many millions of years ago. And at that time on the planet, there was less deuterium. Okay. So that is water locked in time, essentially.
And deuterium is increasing on the planet also. Is that true or not true? Or is it?
It has been slowly increasing. Yeah. This is the whole basis behind the science of deuteronomics, which is a new branch of biochemistry, which endeavors to explain how water is managed by the body, and also how the body discriminates for lighter hydrogen versus heavier hydrogen. But based on studying the physiology, we find that the optimal is in the 120 ppm range. So there's some theories that Homo sapiens evolved, between 100 and 400,000 years ago, and at that time there was less deuterium on the planet. One of the things that increased the deuterium on the planet, there's cycles, it goes up and down, but generally it's been upward trend. But after the Ice Age...
Let me interrupt you for just a second. So is it possible to actually drink deuterium-depleted water that's too low in terms of the health benefits? Is it good to actually modulate it into that 120, 125, 130 range, somewhere in there? Is that
you're gonna self-modulate into that range anyway, even if you drink, whether you drink diluted water or 10 ppm or 5 ppm that we make, which by the way doesn't occur anywhere in nature. However, because of all the food that we eat, like I drink it straight, not all the time, but when I do, I've noticed I could get down to about in the mid 90s in terms of. So if you drink 90 ppm water, you're going to be about 10, 15, 20 ppm over because of all the food that we eat.
Yeah, so you're polluted by everything else that's going into your body, so to speak.
Yeah, so based on that, you're never going to get that low. You're never going to get as low as your metabolic water.
So let's just take a little detour here on testing, because we're talking about parts per million of this deuterium water. And for the audience, it probably sounds like, well, that's all very fine and well and good, but how am I ever going to know what's in my water, what's in me, that kind of thing? Do you want to talk a little bit about testing that's available?
Yeah, so because the water has, one primary function, and that's to reduce the amount of deuterium in the body, it's good to know if it actually works or not. And the only way to know is if you test yourself, test your saliva. So we have a lab, deuteriumtest.com, and we can measure water, saliva, essentially, other samples like breath vapor if we need to. And that gives you you can either test the baseline or you can guess your baseline based on where you live. And then you can test after you've been drinking light water for usually 60 to 90 days and see how well it's working for you, what you're able to get down to. And then you periodically test every 3 to 6 months, or maybe even once a year, just to see that it did decrease your deuterium levels in your body by a certain percentage point.
There's a salivary test, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, is deuterium highest in the saliva, and then it's a little lower in the blood and a little lower in the tissues and things like that? Or
well, the saliva is a really good indicator of extracellular water, and breath vapor is a better indicator of intercellular and more mitochondrial water. So if you clinically, what they do is if they really want a lot of data, they will test saliva and breath vapor and then see if there's a delta between the two. And that delta will tell you how well your body is filtering deuterium out of the electron transport chain or not.
Because I think people should understand that your body will recognize, in a way, that there's deuterium in the water, and it works to kind of filter it out. In fact, I think there
is a discrimination that happens.
Right, yeah, exactly, which is kind of intriguing, quite honestly. So we have this deuterium in the water. These people in Russia were living longer, and they were healthier, more
not only living longer, but they're also giving birth into older, far.
Okay. So more fertility, right?
Yeah.
And so that had to be incredibly interesting. So when you think about that, we know about certain things, lifestyle choices, of course, that make a big difference: Mediterranean diet, sunshine, grounding, exercise, good sleep, all these kinds of things, eating, nutrient-dense foods. But now there's another thing here that seems to be as important, if not even more important than some of that. These people were kind of pushing forward with more fertility, more virility, more strength, I take it, and they were living longer lives, but also, from what I understand, they were more disease-free as they were living those lives. Is that correct?
They were more disease-free, which is really to their benefit because they didn't have any hospitals nearby.
Right.
So, a lot of it is cumulative. It's over time. It's multi-generational. In fact, out of the many studies that were done, there were a lot of studies done on mice because they reproduce so fast, and they found, and then when you compare the differences between a control group that's drinking normal water, and by normal I mean 150 ppm, versus mice that were drinking deuterium-depleted water by 20% or more, and then mice that were drinking deuterium-enriched water, you see what they predicted you would see, and that's essentially by the second or third generation, those that were slightly drinking deuterium-rich water were infertile, and the ones that were drinking light water, not only were they faster to maturity, but they were bigger, more virile, and had more offspring. And the benefits were seen as multi-generational. So by the third generation, they were all bigger, had healthier coats. Also, there was, all kinds of mouse studies done to the point, testing their resilience, depression, all kinds of things. And certainly light water is an intervention that increases cellular energy, and everywhere it gets expressed, cognitively, physically, emotionally, all of it.
Yeah, that's really pretty cool. So the question comes to mind of, is there another group of people outside of the Russian cohorts that were studied that have also shown to have extended health spans when they're drinking deuterium?
Yeah, there were some studies in Bulgaria, I believe. Most of the Eastern Bloc were privy to the research, so they had looked into it as well. So there was that. There was the Tuvan people. Where else were they? Anywhere in the Caucasus Mountains, they looked as well. So anywhere there were any mountain areas. I'm trying to remember the one right now, but I forget now.
Yeah.
This was all done before there were roads going in to where these people live. So all of that's been skewed now by Western food and all the problems that a paved road brings, and all the solutions it offers as well. However,
So how do you rate the deuterium? I assume that it's probably additive. So for example, if somebody is, let's say, living a clean life, and they were to add this, would they notice much difference? Or is it more of a situation where somebody's not living a clean life, so to speak, and they add this, that they're going to notice a bigger difference? Or is it the other way around, where it's going to take longer for the person that's...
I think the older and sicker will notice it faster.
Okay.
Well, that's my opinion formed over, all the people I've seen and all the data I've received and all the testimonials. Now, that's not to say that people that are healthy, they certainly, it'll make you as good as you ever were because you've taken a lot of stress off the body, but it's not going to stop the aging process. B, it will give you a lot of mitochondrial energy that you won't expect because as the aging process happens, we lose energy, we lose mitochondria. So there's a bit of that net energy benefit that's restorative. But just personally, I've seen it work faster and quicker with people that were older and sicker, especially people that have more deuterium in their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that are younger, it works. It's just more subtle. It just, for me,
I was just going to say, I can imagine for younger people, when you talk about virility and fertility and you think about decreasing sperm counts and you think about decreasing testosterone levels and infertility for women, I wonder if, and you can never make this recommendation, this is not any kind of a medical recommendation, it's a question, but it makes you wonder if drinking deuterium depleted water, during the reproductive years would actually improve not only fertility, but also the outcome of the offspring. So
I'm glad you brought that up because I wrote an article on this that's in the Townsend Letter. Basically, it was fertility as a non-medical intervention for deuterium depletion is a non-medical intervention for increasing fertility, and there's a lot of good support for that.
Yeah, which is an interesting point. And then you made a point about older people have more deuterium in their bodies. How does that work? Is it just they have less ability to clear it, or what's the story?
It's cumulative. So yeah, it's just we get overrun fairly quickly. So the average person has about 2 grams. 2 grams of the hydrogen in their body is in this heavier form. And what's interesting is there's a way to tune an MRI machine where you can just see the deuterium, right? You don't need, and you don't need to drink heavy water for contrast because it'll just light up wherever it is. And it tends to concentrate in tumors, they've noticed. So it just accumulates over time. The body doesn't clear it.
Here's an interesting thing that you just brought up was tumors, if I can interrupt for a second. So I've seen quite a bit of data studies looking at use of deuterium depleted water to enhance cancer therapy. I don't think anybody's touting it as a cancer cure itself, although there are some reports of tumor shrinkage and disappearance and things like that. But it sounds like in conjunction with, let's just say that, other healthy things you might be doing, that it does seem to have an impact on treating cancer, and I suspect maybe on preventing cancer if these people are living older and not having increased cancer rates. Do you want to talk a little bit about cancer here?
Yeah, I think that's why we're censored on Wikipedia, because every time legitimate editor goes in there to edit something to put some studies up there, it gets erased the next day. And the reason for that is because there's or at least my opinion on this is, there's a scientist in this in our world. He has a competing water company called Preventa, and his name is Dr. Gabor Shamlai. He sells primarily in Hungary, and he's Hungarian. And back when he got into this in the 80s, he as part of his graduate studies, his thesis was hydrogen deuterium ratio affects oncogenes. So he discovered that if you have too much deuterium, then you have higher risk for the oncogenes turning on, and if you have less deuterium, then you have less risk. So oncogenes are basically markers in our genetics that make us more or less susceptible to certain cancers. So basically he was saying, look, here's the evidence, here's my thesis. And over the next 30 years, he built up over 3,000 case studies of primarily cancer patients, and he used deuterium depletion as an adjuvant treatment, as complementary treatment. It wasn't, whether they were doing conventional treatment or whether they were doing alternative or whether they were doing nothing at all, 3,000 plus people, case study, he saw all kinds. But the main thing is that he was reducing their deuterium levels. And then he wrote 2 books on the subject, one 20 years ago, one last year, kind of an update. called deuterium depletion.
And what was the net effect? I've seen a little bit of animal data and or some human data as well, where some tumors regress completely. Actually,
well, that effect. Okay, it's not the water; it's that your body is lowering its deuterium level, and when the deuterium level is lowered, then it increases. There's a net energy increase in the body. So
immune function, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about the body being a self-healing organism, and here is a great example of that. So the body just has the energy to deal with the cancer better. And then, people have called me that have gone through chemotherapy, and they said, and even the doctor comments on it as well. Says, well, it was incredibly effective. It's like there was very little side effects. The sickness. The body was just more resilient, less resilient to stress, and it worked better. Somebody was deuterium depleted. There is a brain surgeon that recommends his patients get on light water a month before surgery because it just lowers their stress and increases their resilience to what's coming, which is surgery, which is very stressful. So when you lower the deuterium level, the body does have less stress because it has less work to do to repair the damage that is ongoing constantly from that. And then not to mention the mutations in enzymes and DNA.
Right. There's a flip side to this also, which is that you're talking about the body facing sort of a traumatic challenge, right? Either surgery or a tumor or something. But there's a flip side to it, which is, if you're looking at doing regenerative therapies, let's say you've got a bad shoulder, bad knee, bad whatever, you've had a concussion, and now you're doing regenerative therapies. We know that regenerative therapies always work better when you my analogy is you kind of prepare the field, you plow the field, then you put in the seeds of regenerative medicine, and then you basically water and fertilize that on the back end. You get the best results. And it sounds like the deuterium depleted water would be a great way to help facilitate that whole healing process, just the way using, red light as an adjunct would improve some of that process, et cetera. So any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it works. The body just needs the energy, right? The cells just need energy, and we are constantly zapped by so many things. We burn minerals like they're gasoline. Okay, so we have to. A lot of times we don't replenish them properly, so we get run down, especially in trace elements, trace minerals. Yeah. Everybody's chronically dehydrated, which is not a function of not drinking enough water, because you could drink a gallon of water and still be dehydrated. It's just once you lose homeostasis, it's difficult to restore. But when you have homeostasis, it's difficult to knock you off your center too. So you're either maintaining good health or you're trying to catch up to something that is hard, because the insult to the injury is that whatever the illness or the weakness is it's zapping your energy, and it's energy that you need to fight it. So it's a law of diminishing returns. Yeah. So this is a kind of net energy intervention. That works. That's a complementary with other therapies, but first and foremost, get the body swimming in the right pool.
Yeah, right. This episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast is brought to you by H2 Molecular Hydrogen in the Gladden Longevity Store.
Yeah, Steve, you've heard us talk about this numerous times on the podcast in terms of the benefits of H2 and hydrogen water. We love it. It's really the best way to balance your entire redox system. So it really protects you from free radical damage. I take it every time I get on a flight to protect me from radiation damage when I'm flying. And I use it to rejuvenate my brain in the afternoon. There's really two kinds of exercise. There's physical exercise, and taking H2 before or after that works great. But also there's mental exercise. And I find that the H2 will bring your brain back when you're tired in the afternoon. So I think it's like the perfect thing for longevity and for performance, quite honestly.
And I talked to you about this, that I found dropping 1 or 2 tablets in a glass of water right before bed. I've seen an overall bump in my deep sleep when I do so. And
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you click on the store tab when you visit GladdenLongevityShop.com and use the promo code podcast10, you'll get 10% off your order. And this code isn't only good for our H2 product, but it's also good for all the supplements we carry. So podcast 10 at the GladdenLongevityShop.com.
Yeah, one of the other things that I use it for routinely is when I'm about to go on a mountain bike ride And I will say this, that if I go on a long mountain bike ride, I will take one prior, I'll take one during, and I'll take one after. And some of the Ironmen that we've worked with have said that when they're doing an Ironman, they'll take it 3 or 4 times throughout the race. And their comment is that it's like taking out the old battery and putting in a new one. It really rejuvenates your body's ability to perform when you're doing more extended athletic activity. So think about that too. If you want to go do a longer hike or whatever else, take it with you.
So GladdenLongevityShop.com, enter podcast 10 for 10% off your order.
H2 molecular hydrogen. It's low-hanging fruit on your quest to make 100 the new 30. Well, it's interesting because if you're listening to this, probably almost anything that you're doing would probably be enhanced, if you will, by having the deuterium in your body depleted. Do you want to talk a little bit about, I saw some things about supplements being higher in deuterium and certain...
Well, I will say this. So when you're deuterium depleted, what happens? It's a metabolic intervention. So things process faster, right? Your metabolism increases. So there's a bunch of medicine out there right now that has expired. Patents only last 20 years, so they expire. So there's a lot of medicines that have been reformulated, repatented with deuterium, because what they do is they slow down the mechanism of action. They slow down the metabolism. Now, this isn't this isn't in a class of pharmaceuticals. Now, supplements aren't doing this. However, in supplements, anytime you concentrate at something, you have the potential of increasing its deuterium content. A good example would be hydrogenated fats, or fats that are processed or processed in some way, right? Not unnatural. So that, you bubble hydrogen through fat, you're going to get more deuterium. Right? And then you cook something that is already high deuterium. In that, you're going to get even higher, and you're going to exceed the levels of deuterium that are on the planet. So, fried foods or hydrogenated oil would be like 157, 158, upwards of closer to 160 ppm, which doesn't exist on the planet. So that is really, really bad. And so anytime you concentrate something, essentially, so some supplements, they may have more deuterium than not. So that's why.
When I think about this, we're talking about shifting the deuterium concentration in your body by, let's say, 20 points, roughly.
15 to 20%.
15 to 20%. So if we're talking 150, then that's 15 and 7, that's 22. You're going to drop it by 22, right, so to speak. Or if it's 20%, you're going to drop it by 30. But you're probably not going to quite get there. So anyway,
it's between 120 and 130 ppm, which is...
Okay. So that's about exactly what we just talked about then.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that in reading about this, and I'm curious, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that if you go higher on the deuterium, you're kind of like lobbing these heavy hydrogens into your machinery that's basically designed to run on light hydrogen, so to speak. So it's gunking everything. Right. The reaction time is 9 times slower, and everything gets slowed down and bogged down, and energy production's down. Now, it seems like if you were to drop the full, let's say 20%, you're kind of hitting an optimal level. But is it a linear line between a 20% drop and a 0% drop? Or is there sort of an exponential element to it in terms of, if you drop it 5 points, you actually get a benefit. If you drop it 10 points, you get not a 2x benefit, but you get a 2.5x benefit. Is there any kind of math like that going on here that's been worked out with the biochemistry?
Over time. Again, you have to put in how long too, the time.
Sure.
So that's the key. The adverse biological effect of deuterium is proportional to the square of the concentration.
Okay.
So if something's proportional to the square of the concentration, the time is really important too.
Okay.
So yes, a little bit over a long time will have better benefits than a lot over a short time. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you go live in one of these places that have naturally lower deuterium, Boulder, Colorado, for example. It's like 139 out the tap, and then a little bit lower on the eastern slope. If you live and work and train there, 5-10 years straight, the amount of energy conservation that will happen, let's say your twin brother lives somewhere in Los Angeles where it's 150 ppm. Over a 10-year period, you're going to see the difference. Because over time, that person that has been consuming deuterium depleted water or slightly depleted water is going to have a greater energy conservation than the person living in the area where it's 20% higher.
Yeah, I get the cumulative effect over time.
Now that said, the early studies showed that even if you did this 1 week a month, there's still benefit.
Okay.
Like I've quantified it to here. It's based on your deuterium level, But what if you do it for a while and then stop? Well, your deuterium levels are going to go back up, obviously, because you're drinking regular water again. But will any of the health benefits endure? And the answer is yes.
Interesting.
For how long? It's
sure. It's better if you're able to have consistency at some level. Yeah. I get that. So I'm curious. So you had mentioned that you are producing a water that's 5 to 10 parts per million. So
we make a 5 and a 10.
You make a 5 and a 10 parts per million. So just so the audience understands now, we've gone from 150, 130, 120 down to 5 to 10. So this is some seriously depleted deuterium water. So can you talk us, I know you probably have patents around this and everything else, IP, but can you talk us through a little bit about how you go about that, how you take deuterium out?
Yeah, it's kind of just a fancy way of mimicking the hydrological cycle of the earth, right? You have, in water, you have most of it is lighter and a little bit of it is heavier. So as it evaporates...
Can you distill it, so to speak?
It is, the name of the process is rectification distillation. So It's a type of distillation.
Got it.
It's the way you would make a vodka, for example.
Sure. Yeah, take off the thing that's more volatile.
Yeah. And then we have there's a little bit of temperature difference we can exploit it in, because there's a slight difference in at the phase change, freezing and boiling point, and it's very minute, but we exploit that. And that's what makes the water expensive is the amount of energy that's needed to do this, because it's boiling and cooling cycles, right? Mm-hmm. And then an ability to separate at just the right moment. Right. And then you have to do it continuously. So you produce very little, and you take it, and it requires an enormous amount of energy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's not energy efficient.
No.
So that being said, can people access this water? Where is this being made? I know it's being made, I think, in Russia and some other places in Europe. Maybe.
Our factory's in Russia. We're building one here. It's going to take a couple of years. But we are putting a production facility here. It's expensive. It's never been done before, but that's the kind of stuff we like. But so our water comes from our plant over there, and then we have some competitors, Romanians, Hungarians. Now we're the only ones that do it 5 and 10 ppm water, and our water is a little different than all of our competition because we don't remineralize the water. We want to give it to you as pure as it comes out, as pure as we make it. So essentially our water is...
People are going to drink this, they're going to have to remineralize it, because just drinking mineral depleted water itself is kind of harsh on your system, right? It kind of leaches out minerals and other things.
I think it's kind of all hype. There's really been no basis behind that, because most of the minerals in water are inorganic anyway. But that said, we're big believers in ketone marine plasma, and we encourage people either to take that separately or remineralize their water. Now, what most of our customers do is dilute our water with some spring water. So to make it go further, that's another way. But what's interesting is our water tastes good. Most distilled water doesn't have a flavor. Ours has a very nice, crisp, delicious flavor, so people like it as is. But I like to get my minerals from food. And certainly if you drink a spring water, you should drink something with a low total dissolved solid count.
Is there a way for people to test their water and see how much deuterium's in it? Do you have a test for that also, where people can?
Well, we test it here at the lab, but there's no way you could do it at home, because you need.
Could they send you a sample of their water and have it tested in the lab?
Absolutely, we charge $99 for that. We're happy to do it, or we're happy to guesstimate what your water is for you as well, because most of it is publicly available data, like all the tap water in the U.S., all the municipal water. It's also tested for deuterium.
What about somebody that's not drinking tap water? What about somebody that's drinking bottled water or reverse osmosis water or something?
We've tested a lot of that water, and sure, we can do a test for you. There's not, as far as bottled water goes, if your bottled water is of a glacial origin, it will be slightly lower, but not much. The probably lowest bottled water on the planet is water from Mount Everest, the Himalayas. That would be in the upper 120s. That would be, and then the lowest water in the United States would probably be anything from a glacial source, so anywhere between 136 and 143. Like up here in Lake Tahoe, it's 146. So now the other way you can assist your body in deuterium in deuterium depletion is by focusing on a ketogenic diet. That, like you mentioned earlier, 1 kilo of fat will produce 1.1 liters of deuterium depleted water. How depleted? It's going to fluctuate, but it'll be severe. It'll be a lot more depleted than regular tap water.
Okay.
So
then how do people get the water? There's a lot of geopolitical unrest at the moment, and is there any issue getting water to the U.S. or any of that kind of stuff?
We don't have an issue because we're not caviar or vodka, so that's good.
Okay.
2, we don't have an issue because we're all one. It's one company, so that's our manufacturing arm in Russia, but it's not entirely true. They did impose a 30% duty on us in Commonwealth countries. So anything made in Russia gets a 30% duty now because of the conflict and because of the war happening over there. But in terms of our company, we're just scientists and engineers. We don't have much to do with, or anything to do with politics for that matter. So we haven't had any, nobody's sanctioned on our list. Everything still works. Everything's fine. We're not affiliated with any, we're affiliated with health. So we're kind of left alone. And plus, like I said, we're not caviar or oil or vodka. So
Right. Got it.
Generally we're okay. But that said, we're building a factory here in the U.S. because you have to, the technology took 20 years to develop, but now that everything's working well, it's just a matter of site selection because, again, energy is expensive. So you have to put yourself somewhere where you hit everything, right? You need the right energy source at an affordable price. You need water. It helps to start with water that's already a little lower because that saves you on energy.
Yep.
So there's all kinds of factors involved in this. And as you know, in Russia over there, energy is a lot less. It's less expensive there than it is here. And that's where the science came from anyway. So
yeah, sounds like you need a factory in Antarctica.
Well, the thing about Antarctica, people have joked.
You can't. But.
I know it's in jest, but people have proposed towing icebergs over. Unfortunately, you cannot take anything out of Antarctica for commercial use.
Right.
So
understood. I was making it.
But on a side note, people go to stay at least American science. Probably all international scientists go to McMurdo Station, which is the U.S.'s the research facility down there, and people report all kinds of health problems just mysteriously going away. This is kind of a known trend down there.
Interesting.
And I had met one of these researchers, started explaining why, and they were telling me like how aches and pains went away, and like long-standing chronic but not severe or serious health issues were going away, because obviously nobody with seriously severe health issues would go down there, but aches and pains and sleep issues, basic stuff as you get older, and people coming back from there reporting that their health has improved dramatically. And I'm explaining to them it's because you're drinking 89 ppm water. They didn't really put the two together. But
yeah, it's fascinating. Interesting. So how do people get your water? You have a website, Litewater?
We do. We have a website, Drink Litewater, actually. It's a DRINKLITEWATER. The word light is spelled LITE. That's our main website, and then we have some websites that are ours that are in our orbit, like deuteriumtest.com. Although anything you can get on our main website, and then I also host a semi-annual Deuterium Depletion Summit where I gather the world's top scientists, researchers, and thinkers in this field, and basically make continuing education available for practitioners, doctors. And so.
That's interesting.
It's usually in the March or April of every other year. We've done 2 so far, and it's available online. Like all those recordings for somebody that wants to get into this a lot deeper would be at deuterium-depletionsummit.com. If you're a researcher, then there's a site called deuterium-depletion.org where I put as much of the information on this, like all the last 60 plus years of research, in one place, basically assemble it all in one website. So that's a good resource for.
And what was the name of that again?
That's Deuterium-depletion.org. It's just an informational website for studies, research articles, and all the languages that they were published in. That's quite a bit. That's when somebody says, well, there's nothing about this. I never heard about this. I go, well, let me argue with you on that point. Let me push back on that point and go to Deuterium-depletion.org, where you'll see a lot has been written about this. A lot has been studied. Unfortunately, it's just not much in the United States. Now, there were times in the United States where this was a subject that was talked about among scientists, but it was because there was no commercial source of deuterium-depleted water that it never made it to the layman. Yeah. So like in 1972, they had this big conference when they decided, proclaimed, they declared that deuterium is incompatible with human biology, and then they went on to their next subject, the next thing. So it wasn't until it started becoming commercially available and people started using it and actually depleting, which is a compound word for deuterium depletion. It's only then that more people started becoming interested in this, and not only on the layman side, which is the consumer side, but also on the scientific research and medical side.
Yeah, it's fascinating how something that's not understood is not given any credibility at all, and nobody seems to bother to look into it. We see that over and over again in certain areas. So,
well, it was overlooked because everybody says, yeah, there's a little bit of this in our body, but what's 2 grams, in a 150-pound frame?
Right.
What does that matter? And again, this is why Dr. Ogun is so important in this whole provenance of this whole thing, because he said, here's the problem. He looked at how much deuterium there was compared to glucose, magnesium, potassium, all the basic elemental and molecular constituents of life, and he saw that there was 5 to 10 times more by molecular weight. So he said, well, that's a problem. Well, what the heck is it doing? And then he looked then he did 2.5 years of mathematical modeling to figure out its impact on the ATP synthase nanomotor, which produces all the ATP, not all, but most of the bulk of the ATP in our body. And so he said, oh, huge problem. This doesn't fit. It's a square peg in a round hole. If you got you can't fit that elephant through the door. So, and he published on this, and then he was not an American scientist. It was kind of overlooked, although it was published in the New York, in a prestigious New York Annal of Medicine journal. So it just, some things get overlooked, and then they have to come around 2, 3 times, 4 times again. And then Dr. Laszlo Boros coined the term deuteronomics and really devoted a lot of study to metabolomics, and really pushed it a little further than it is now. And he's got a graduate program in Europe for people that want to get a PhD in this. So it's just starting to be recognized as a legitimate branch of biochemistry.
So in going to your website, I just went there a little bit ago and looked. It sounds like you're out of product based on the website. It said sold out. Is that true?
We're out of the 1 liter glass. That'll be back in stock before the end of the year. We lost our glass supplier, so we had to make our own glass. So we made our own mold, found a factory so we're out of stock because we ran out of packaging. So some people like this water and glass, so we make it available in plastic and glass. So we have the 5 ppm in glass available right now, end of December, the 1 liter in glass. But if your goal is deuterium depletion, buy it in plastic. I drink it in plastic because you're going to save money. Unless money's no object for you, then sure, buy it in glass. It's just more expensive in glass. And we blow all our own molds, all our own plastic, ship everything temperature controlled. I'm a purist, so I make sure that there is absolutely nothing in there that will leach. We've had it tested. So it's the more affordable way to consume it. But if you like glass, we're unfortunately out of stock on the 1 liter one.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Well, great. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you about this. It's a little bit of an esoteric topic for the audience. Some of the people are probably familiar with it, but it was great to have
it is esoteric, and I encourage people before they dive into it completely, if they're going to do it, it's expensive, and if you want to ensure success, read the deuterium depletion guides. You're a little more versed in it now after this podcast. You'll be a little bit more versed in it after you read
when you say
free guide.
When you say expensive, I mean, we're talking hundreds of dollars a month for water. We're not talking thousands of dollars a month from what I can see.
We're talking thousands of dollars a month for water, but we are talking, you're going to spend between $200 and $500 a month for water, depending how, your family, how much you drink, and so forth. I mean, it's like a car payment without the car. But unfortunately, it's the cost that we bear in making it and that we pass on to consumers. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good. Well, again, thanks so much, Victor. Really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast. If you would like more information on what we've discussed or other topics, please reference the show notes or go to GladdenLongevityPodcast.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter by searching Gladden Longevity. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to get future episodes delivered to you and share our podcast or this episode with someone in your life that you may find benefit. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another exciting episode. The Gladden Longevity Podcast is provided for informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of a physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The use of any information and materials linked to this podcast is at the listener's own risk.